Hello and welcome. What was meant to be one of Washington's most carefully choreographed evenings, equal parts politics, media, spectacle, and satire on Saturday, suddenly turned into a scene of fear and explosive uncertainty. At the Washington Hilton during the White House Correspondents Association dinner, Secret Service agents rushed President Donald Trump and First Lady out of the building. Moments earlier, a man armed with a shotgun, a handgun, and knives had opened fire on security personnel at the checkpost inside the hotel. The attacker, identified as Cole Thomas Allen from California, was quickly tackled and arrested. But the damage in the broader sense was already done. Because this wasn't just another security scare, it was a breach of space and perhaps more importantly, of the illusion that even the most heavily guarded political rituals are immune to violence that shadows American public life. Trump later said he believed he was the target, given the sitting and even packed with top officials, cabinet members, and journalists, and the weapons involved. That claim is difficult to dismiss outright. What is harder to ignore, though, is a pattern of this incident fits into. This is not the first time Trump had come face to face with an assassination attempt. In fact, it wasn't even the second. To understand the weight of the night in April 26, you have to go back to the poll season of 2024, a period already defined by intense polarization and political tension. On July 13, 2024, at a campaign rally in Pennsylvania, gunfire erupted. Trump was on stage when shots rang out. He clutched his ear as blood became visible. One person in the crowd was killed, two others were injured, and the attacker, a 20-year-old named Thomas Matthew Crooks, was shot dead by security forces. In the aftermath, as agents surrounded him and rushed him off stage, Trump raised his fist. It was a brief gesture, but one that quickly image of defiance. For critics, it was part of a carefully constructed political persona. Either way, it ensured that the moment would not simply fade into an incident, it would become a narrative. Just over 2 months later, there was another attempt, this time at Trump International Golf Club in West Palm Beach. Secret Services agents spotted a man hiding in the bushes with a gun while Trump was on the premises. He was apprehended before he could act and later sentenced to life in prison. 2 attempts in a matter of months, and then, less than 2 years later, the Washington Hilton incident. This places Trump in a rare and unsettling category in American history, a political figure who has repeatedly survived assassination attempts in an era already marked by deep divisions. The last time something remotely comparable happened, the story took on almost mythic proportions. In October 1912, former President Theodore Roosevelt was campaigning in Milwaukee. Having broken away from the Republican Party, he was running as a candidate of the Progressive Party, popularly known as the Bull Moose Party. As Roosevelt left a hotel and then approached his campaign event, a man named John Shinrank stepped forward and shot him in the chest at close range. What happened next has become one of the most extraordinary episodes in American political history. The bullet did not kill Roosevelt, slowed by a metal eyeglass case and folded 50-page speech in his pocket, it lodged in his chest, creating a relatively small wound. Doctors later determined that removing it would be more dangerous than leaving it in its place. But Roosevelt didn't know the full extent of damage in the moment, and what he did know was that he had been shot. And instead of going straight to the hospital, he chose to proceed with his speech. Standing before a stunned audience, he began with a line that has echoed through history. He said, "I don't know whether you fully understand that I have been shot, but it takes more than to kill a blue moose." He then delivered a 90-minute address before finally agreeing to seek medical attention. The incident transformed Roosevelt's image. It reinforced a narrative of toughness, resilience, and almost theatrical courage, but it did not win him the election. His candidacy split the Republican vote, allowing Democratic Woodrow Wilson to secure the presidency. Roosevelt accepted the result, he conceded defeat, and moved on. The contrast between resilience in the face of violence and acceptance of democratic outcomes marks a critical difference between the present and past. Because political violence in the United States is not an anomaly, it's woven into its history. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in 1865, shot in the head while attending a play, targeted in part for his stance on black rights and abolition of slavery. James Garfield was shot in 1881 and died months later. William McKinley was assassinated in 1901. John F. Kennedy was killed in 1963 in Dallas. Robert F. Kennedy, a presidential candidate, was assassinated in 1968. There have been numerous attempts as well on presidents and candidates alike. Gerald Ford survived 2 assassination attempts in quick succession. Threats and plots have targeted leaders from George H.W. Bush to Barack Obama. So the presence of violence is not new. What is new, or at least more pronounced, is the context in which it now unfolds. The rise of hyperpartisan politics, the information flows, the amplification of rhetoric through digital platforms, all of these factors have contributed to the climate where political opponents are increasingly framed not just as rivals but as existential threats. In such an environment, the line between speech and action can begin to blur. The stormy 2024 election campaign was already seen as a turning point. The attempt on Trump's life that year heightened fears that the country was entering a more dangerous phase. The events of January 6, 2021, when a mob stormed the U.S. Capitol in an attempt to overturn an election result, had already demonstrated how political rhetoric could translate into mass action. Against that backdrop, the 2026 attack at the Washington Hilton feels less like an isolated incident and more like part of a trajectory. It also raises uncomfortable questions about security and vulnerability. The Hilton itself is not just any venue, it carries a historical weight. In 1981, it was the site of assassination attempt on President Ronald Reagan, who was shot and wounded as he left the hotel. Decades later, despite advances in security, another armed attacker managed to penetrate the same space during one of the most high-profile events in the country. This suggests that while security measures can evolve, they may never fully keep pace with the nature of threats that are designed to counter. And perhaps that points to a deeper issue, because while it's possible to fortify buildings, increase surveillance, and tighten protocols, it's far more difficult to address the underlying forces that drive individuals towards violence in the first place. History shows that each act of political violence leaves a mark, not just on the current victim, but on broader political culture. Lincoln's assassination reshaped the course of Reconstruction. Kennedy's death altered the trajectory of the 1960s. Roosevelt's shooting became part of the enduring legend. The question now is, what effect repeated attempts on a figure like Donald Trump will have on American politics? Will they deepen divisions, reinforce narratives of persecution, or prompt a broader reckoning about the direction in which the country is heading? These are no easy answers, but one thing is clear. These movements do not simply pass. They linger, they shape perceptions, they influence behavior. And in a nation where democracy has long coexisted with episodes of violence, the echoes of such incidents often prove to be as consequential as the events themselves. Because in the end, it's not just the gunshots that matter, it is what comes after. Thank you.